A few months ago, our church secretary, Diana, many of you probably remember her from that picture, she told me that she needed to relocate to North Carolina because she just couldn't afford to live in the Bay Area any longer. After more than 20 years, she had to leave, and she was devastated. She had no idea how she would pack up and move from the place that she had called home and the people she had loved and served and called family for 2 decades. Many tears were shed over that summer as she tried to figure out how she would get through that momentous life change all alone. Recently, another friend told me that a routine chest x-ray that she had revealed a worrisome anomaly on her lung. It didn't look good. It was probably cancer. She was scared. And a few months ago, I spoke with a victim of domestic violence. The abuse had deeply impacted her and devastated her emotional and mental sense of well-being and self-worth. Reclaiming her life would be an uphill battle. 3 stories from 3 people facing 3 scary giants. Almost everyone I know is facing some sort of giant in their life. And when I say giant, I mean a powerful opponent who comes into our lives and threatens to take over our existence. They occupy our minds with worry. They make us feel small and defenseless. They convince us that we are weak and that we will not survive. Some of these giants are real. They threaten our health, or our safety, or our jobs, or sense of security. Others are imagined. They prey on our fears. But all of them are dangerous and potentially destructive. The Bible tells a great story about one of those giants. You probably know it. A seafaring people from the island of Crete called the Philistines had moved to Palestine and settled along the coast, and they started to threaten the ancient Israelites who lived there. The Philistines were well armed and battle-tested. Well, they soon advanced on the tiny Jewish nation, and King Saul was alarmed, and so he deployed his troops to confront the enemy. For a long time, the 2 sides were deadlocked, staring at each other from opposite sides of the ravine in the Elah Valley at the base of the Judean mountains. And then after a while, from the ranks of the Philistines, a giant standing almost 7 feet tall came forward, dressed in armor and wielding a javelin, a spear, and a sword. And he challenged the Israelites to a contest between him and one other man. This was known in ancient warfare as single combat. And the outcome would decide which side would win the war. Now, no one in King Saul's ranks dared to move or even breathe. But then a young shepherd boy from Bethlehem who had brought food to his brothers on the front lines, he stepped forward. The king said, No, you're much too small. You're not a warrior. You're just a shepherd boy. But David insisted. Well, Saul was out of options, so he let him. And he offered David his armor. But David politely declined and sprang down the hill toward the giant with nothing but a slingshot in his hands. A crazy strategy, right? No one would do that. Or was it? You see, Goliath was heavy infantry. He was a foot soldier. And in those days, they were usually weighed down with armor and swords and shields. And he expected to confront another warrior just like him. But David was free from heavy armor and weaponry. He was able to run toward Goliath with great speed and maneuver nimbly around his lumbering opponent. Now, lest you think that this is a fictional story in the Bible, modern ballistic experts have studied this. And they say that the velocity at which David hurled that stone with his slingshot was more than enough to stop Goliath in his tracks. And so David, the underdog, saved the day. David used his unique ability with a slingshot to outsmart his opponent and take him down. It was the very thing that everyone else overlooked and the giant did not expect. Today we begin a new series that we're calling Defeating Giants. It's all about how to take on the giants in your life and win. Take a look at this whimsical take.
A dog's life can be a little humdrum. Except every once in a while, duty calls. I'm needed to protect, to guard, and sometimes take down giants.
The power of the underdog. No one expects it. Why? Because giants often are not what we think they are. We think that their strength will win the battle every time, but actually what seem to be their strengths, like Goliath's heavy armor and weapons, are often their greatest weaknesses. And the problem is that we have become convinced that only giants can be victorious. We have come to believe that physical strength and financial success and social or political power are the only ways to win at life. But throughout this series, we're going to encounter many underdogs and misfits in the Bible, like David, who prevailed in surprising victories over big, scary, ugly giants. And they did it by using unexpected strategies and hidden strengths. And our hope is that in this series, you will come to believe that whatever giant stands in your way right now, or whatever giant stands in the way of a loved one, God will give you or them the strength to win. It's going to be a fascinating series, so let's get started. Our first story comes from one of Jesus' parables in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus said, "There was a judge in a certain town who neither feared God nor respected any human being." So right there at the beginning of the story is our giant, a man of importance, a high-ranking official, a prominent member of society, and a scoundrel. Here comes the underdog. A widow in that town used to come to him and say, "Render a just decision for me against my adversary." Someone was oppressing the widow, and she needed help to get justice. See, a woman in those days needed a man to provide for her financially. And if her husband died and she had no sons, she would suffer extreme poverty, often to the point of being forced to live on the streets or worse. In fact, widows were one of three groups, along with orphans and immigrants, who were considered to be the most vulnerable in society. Because the widow in the parable was seeking help from the court, rather than her male family members, we can assume that she was alone and on her own. She was the underdog. And she tried an unexpected strategy. And that strategy was all she had. It was the same strategy that was used by a man named Vivek Ranadivé 20 centuries later in San Jose, California. I love this story. This is a story about this man named Ranadave. He came from Mumbai, India. He came to America with $50 in his pocket. But later he rose through the ranks to become a Silicon Valley executive and a billionaire. But Ranadave had a problem. He had agreed to coach his middle school daughter's basketball team. And he had never even seen a basketball game, much less played one, sort of like me. The problem was that he didn't understand the game at all, and they didn't have basketball in India. But when he started watching the game, what he couldn't understand was why the opposing team would defend only about 24 feet of the court. Now, you know that I know nothing about sports, but here's the way I understand it. Every time a team scores, they run to the other end of the court, and the other team would passes the ball in from the sidelines and dribbles it all the way down the court, no one blocking them, no one defending the territory until they get down to the other basket where their opponents are waiting. That leaves 70 feet of undefended territory. And that didn't make sense to Ranadave. The other problem for him was that he was coaching a team of girls who were the daughters of nerds and computer programmers. They loved science and math and books. What they didn't have was natural athletic ability. And so if they played the way the other girls played, by letting their opponents dribble the ball all the way up the court without opposition, they wouldn't stand a chance. Because the other girls knew how to pass the ball, they knew how to shoot layups, they knew how to score baskets. Ranadave's girls were clearly the underdogs. And so he decided that his team would have to use an uncommon strategy, one that their rivals would never expect. Rather than trying to win on the same terms as the bigger, stronger girls, Ranadave trained his players to ferociously defend all 94 feet of the basketball court. As soon as the other team passed the ball inbounds, his girls were all over them with a full court press all the way down to the other basket. Every game, every time, without fail, they never stopped. Do you know what that took? Incredible aerobic capacity, because they were running the whole time. Instead of spending a lot of time trying to teach his girls the skills of the game, Ranadave made them run at every practice, run and run and run, so that they would be in shape to undertake this strategy. How did they win? They tried harder than anyone else, and they never gave up. They kept running, and they kept persisting, and they persevered, and they ended up at the national championships. It was the same strategy used by the Israelites. When they were attacked in the desert by a ferocious tribe of nomads called the Amalekites, it's the story we heard in the first reading. Moses and his people, they were hungry and thirsty and tired. They had been running from the Egyptians to escape the Egyptians. And no sooner had they crossed the Red Sea than the Amalekites who lived there pounced on them without warning. They ambushed them in the barren desert where they had the home court advantage. What were they going to do? They were going to be mowed down. But Moses decided to climb to the top of a nearby hill. And he stretched out his hands in prayer to God. And as long as Moses kept his hands raised up, Israel had the better of the fight. But when he let his hands rest and stopped praying, Amalek had the better of the fight. And when his hands grew tired, other people held them up through the whole day until sunset. Do you know what that took? It took uncommon strength and perseverance. But they won. And guess what? So did the widow in the parable today. She also won. Look at what it says. For a long time, the judge was unwilling to give her justice. But eventually he thought, this widow keeps bothering me, and because of that, I'm going to deliver a just decision for her. In the end, the poor widow prevailed over the giant judge. Once again, the underdog won, and the giant was defeated. What was her winning strategy? The same as the others: persistence. Persistence in prayer, persistence in everything. It was the same for Renatave. It was the same for the misfit Israelites facing the Amalekites. In all three cases, the underdog did not fight the giant on his own terms. That would have been a losing scenario. The Amalekites were stronger. They outnumbered the Israelites. The girls on the other basketball team loved the game and had been playing it a long time. The judge had the backing of the social and political elite. No, in all three cases, the underdogs would have lost had they tried to imitate the giants they faced. Instead, they outsmarted them by using the only skill or strength that they had, and that the giant would not ever expect. Giants appear in everyone's life from time to time, and some of them are really big and really nasty. Monsters who want to sit on your chest and pressure you into submission. And you may be intimidated, and you may want to give in, and you may want to resign yourself to the belief that the giant will always win in the end. But it's a lie. It's a lie. It's not consistent with Christian hope. It's not consistent with history. Whether you feel like maybe you're drowning in grief over someone you've lost recently, or you're troubled by a bully at work or school, or you're worried about a gigantic project that is just looming over your head and seems overwhelming, or maybe whether you feel lost because your kids are all grown up and they never visit and you don't know what to do with yourself, or you just got a pretty bad diagnosis, or you're facing a steep climb to recover from an illness, or you just can't shake the feeling of loneliness. Or maybe you still struggle with a trauma from the past. Whatever it is, whatever that giant is in your life or the life of someone you love, the underdogs in this week's message give us an important key to defeating all those giants. Persistence. Trying harder than the giant and trusting in God to give you the victory by playing the long game. That may not sound very comforting, but remember the words of Jesus today. Will not God then secure the rights of his chosen ones who call out to him day and night? No, I tell you, he will not be slow to answer them, but will give them justice and give it speedily. Renatave and his girls, the widow in the parable, the Israelites in their fight, they all won over their giants through perseverance. And so can you. Next week, we're going to encounter another underdog in the Bible who won his battle with a different approach that the overly confident giant in that story never expected. So join us next week for episode 2 of Defeating Giants. Oh, by the way, here's a text that I got from our church secretary, Diana, last week. Here's what it says. I'm very proud of myself, Father. I moved clear across the United States to an unknown state with no job. I gave away most of my belongings and lots of wonderful memories. I'm now near family, building new relationships, and helping to bring Jesus to others. She's got a new apartment that she loves and a new job at the Biltmore Estates in Asheville, North Carolina. And she just started there last week, and she's helping them get ready for a magical Christmas at the Biltmore Estates. That ugly giant of fear could not keep Diana down. And the woman with a spot on her lung, she faced down that giant too through persistent prayer. Turned out to be nothing. And the survivor of domestic violence, she made it through and is now helping other women face that same giant. One after the other, the giants who threaten us cannot stand when we trust in God.